What would you do if the person you love most started acting like a stranger? Would you ignore your instincts, or silently watch every odd sign, every carefully disguised lie? I used to think I was a trusted husband. I believed our marriage was built on honesty. But then, one December evening, everything started to change. And I realized, not everyone who says, "I love you," truly means it. I'm Ethan Miller, 38 years old, living in Charlotte, North Carolina. I run a small interior design company, not a millionaire, but I live comfortably. My wife, Rachel, is an elementary school teacher. We've been married for almost 9 years. No kids, but we were once the couple everyone admired. Or at least, that's what I thought. Everything started when Rachel suddenly changed, for no clear reason. She started coming home later than usual, saying it was due to staff meetings, but she never brought back any materials. She began keeping her phone on silent and took it with her into the bathroom. I'm not the suspicious type, but when the woman who used to call you 3 times a day suddenly goes silent all afternoon, how would you feel? One night, I woke up at 1 a.m. and saw the glow of Rachel's phone still lit. She was lying with her back to me, typing quickly, then hurriedly turned off the screen when I shifted. I asked gently, "You're not asleep yet?" She just smiled. "I'm reading some articles about new teaching techniques. I'm not sleepy yet." My gut instinct kicked in. Not because of her words, but because of the look in her eyes when she lied. I'd seen that look before, from a client who once tried to trick me with a fake contract. I stayed quiet then. But I started remembering every little detail. A few days later, I shared my doubts with Cal, my best friend from college, also my business partner. He's the level-headed type, not easily swayed by emotion. After listening, Cal said bluntly, "Ethan, maybe you're just being paranoid. But if you're not, then you need to be ready." "What do you mean?" "I mean if Rachel's planning a divorce, you need to act before everything is no longer yours." I used to think talking to my wife would solve everything. But strangely, I didn't dare. Not because I feared the confession, but because I feared she'd keep lying, and I wouldn't be able to fool myself anymore. From that day on, I started paying closer attention. She had an overtime schedule, almost every Tuesday and Thursday. She set a new password on her personal computer, something we used to share. And for the first time in years, Rachel bought new lingerie. Not the kind a married woman usually wears. The kind women wear when they want to impress someone. I know, maybe I was overthinking. But one evening, I walked into the living room while she was on the phone, and the moment she saw me, she said, "Yeah, let's talk tomorrow. My husband's home." My husband's home. Just those words, but it sounded like I was a problem, not a partner. I looked at Rachel, and for the first time, I didn't recognize the woman in front of me anymore. I decided I wouldn't just sit and be dragged into court like a fool. I would act quietly. And if Rachel was truly planning to divorce me, then I would teach her a lesson she'd never forget. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Rachel was still asleep, facing away from me, her long hair spread across the pillow. Part of me wanted to gently touch her shoulder and ask directly, "What are you hiding from me?" But then I remembered what Cal said. And more than anything, I remembered how I felt the night before, standing like a stranger in my own home. I didn't want to hear another lie. I needed the truth. And I needed to act before she stabbed me in the back. I started with the basics. First was finances. Rachel and I had a joint account, where we deposited our monthly salaries to cover household expenses. But I also had a separate account under the company's name, where I kept undivided profits. Rachel didn't know much about it, since she never showed interest in the business. I transferred a large portion of that money to another account in a different state, under a new subsidiary company, with Cal as the legal representative. This company had been an expansion idea I'd considered for a while, and now it was officially operational. Legally, it was entirely separate from my personal assets, and no one besides Cal and I knew about it. Next was real estate. Our current house was in both our names. But I also owned a small cabin in the Tennessee mountains, left to me by my father. Rachel hated the place, so I'd never taken her there, and had never clearly explained the ownership. I hired a lawyer to redo the paperwork and transfer the property under the company's name. The cabin was small, but its value was rising fast because the area had become an ecotourism destination. Finally, I looked at business contracts and digital assets. I changed all access to my work email accounts, internal servers, and client databases. I hired an independent legal advisor to review the intellectual property agreements, especially the exclusive interior designs I'd created. Rachel once said, "If we divorce, I just need half the company to live comfortably for life." I remembered that line word for word. And I wasn't going to let it happen. While I quietly moved to protect myself, Rachel seemed completely unaware. She kept playing the role of a busy, distant wife, always with a reasonable excuse for being out late. I started leaving a phone on record mode whenever I left the house, placing it on the bookshelf near the kitchen, where Rachel usually made her calls. After 3 days, I heard her whisper, "Don't worry. Just 2 more weeks. Once everything's done, I'll get half the house, half the assets. He doesn't suspect a thing." I figured out who she meant, me. And that was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't get angry. Strangely, I felt calmer than ever. The pain wasn't emotional anymore, it was the numbness of trust completely shattered. She wasn't just cheating. She was waiting for the right moment to strike, and take everything I'd built. I sent the audio recording to my lawyer, along with a breakdown of my personal assets. He nodded and said, "Ethan, you're already 1 step ahead. If she files for divorce trying to claim joint assets, everything's currently leaning in your favor." "Thank you. But I'm not stopping yet." "What do you mean?" "I want to know who the other man is. And if they're playing games, I'll drag both of them into the light." I hired a private investigator. A week later, he returned with photos and a detailed report. Rachel's lover was a colleague at her school, the vice principal. They had been involved for at least 6 months and had even taken work trips together. Rage boiled inside me, but I held it back. I needed to stick to the plan. I knew I was ready. In 2 weeks, Rachel would file for divorce. She thought she'd won, thought I knew nothing, thought she'd walk away from this marriage with half my fortune. But she had no idea. I had already drained every asset, and was just waiting for the moment she would push herself off the edge. Just as I predicted, on the following Monday morning, Rachel said, "I want to have a serious talk tonight. About our future." I simply nodded. No questions. No reaction. Even though I already knew exactly what was coming, I kept my calm, like someone completely in the dark. And that only made her more confident that I was still clueless. That evening, Rachel tidied up the dinner table, lit a small candle in the center, a little. Normalized the mood. Move I knew well, something she only did when she was about to say something unpleasant. She sat across from me, her eyes void of the warmth I once knew. "Ethan, I think we both know this relationship isn't what it used to be. I have spoken to a lawyer. I want a divorce." I sat there, looking straight at her. "You want a divorce? Because of someone?" She paused, slightly caught off guard, but quickly regained composure. "No one. It's just, we're no longer happy." I smirked. Still calm. "So what do you want?" Rachel took a breath. She had this prepared. Half the house. Half of our shared assets. And full rights to the savings we put aside for having kids, because you don't need that anymore. She said that last part like a low blow. Like she was trying to emotionally knock me down. I said nothing. Stood up, walked over to the bookshelf, and pulled out a black folder I had prepared days in advance. I placed it in front of her. "Before you go any further, maybe you should look at this." Rachel looked at me, then opened the folder. Inside were bank statements from the last 6 months, showing I had already withdrawn the funds she thought were joint. Property transfer documents, the cabin in Tennessee, digital assets, and company funds moved to the new branch. And most importantly, photos of her and her lover, at restaurants, hotels, and recorded phone calls from when I wasn't home. Rachel's face slowly turned pale. You planned to hide everything from me until the last minute, didn't you? I said slowly. File for divorce, claim half the assets, and move out with your lover like nothing happened. Ethan, she stammered, you were spying on me? No. You were spying on me. But you miscalculated. You thought I wouldn't know. Thought I'd cry, sign the divorce papers, and let you walk away with half my life like some kind of prize. Rachel pushed her chair back, trying to stay calm. I'll sue you. You hid the assets. You had no right. I laughed, for the first time in weeks. Go ahead. But with this file, you'll be countersued for marital fraud and attempted asset appropriation. I didn't do anything wrong. And the man in the photos? What about your call with him? Just 2 more weeks, he doesn't know a thing. Who is he, Rachel? She didn't answer. She just looked at me like I was someone she no longer recognized. No, it was she who had become unrecognizable to me. She left the house that night. Took nothing but her purse. 2 days later, she withdrew her divorce petition, without any explanation. But I didn't care. I had already filed mine, with all the evidence attached to my lawyer's case. The preliminary hearing took place 2 weeks later. Rachel came alone. Her lover didn't show up, as I had suspected. Maybe he disappeared once he realized he was being dragged into the mess. The judge reviewed the file, listened to the recordings, and after just 15 minutes, gave an initial ruling. The defendant shows signs of fraud, collusion, and infidelity. The plaintiff, me, is not obligated to share assets that were legally transferred beforehand. All of the defendant's claims for asset division are denied. Rachel sat motionless, eyes wide open, staring blankly ahead. I didn't feel triumphant, just relieved. The curtain had finally fallen. I stepped out of the courtroom and took a deep breath. The sky that day was strangely blue, as if everything had been cleansed. I thought that once the hearing was over, things would quiet down, that Rachel would slip out of my life quietly. But I had underestimated one thing: how fast the truth spreads in a small community. Just a few days after the verdict was issued, I started getting calls from acquaintances, some mutual friends, a few people in the teaching community where Rachel used to work. Not everyone said it outright, but they all clearly knew something had happened. And then on a Thursday afternoon, I got a call from Angela, a teacher at the same school as Rachel. Ethan, I'm sorry if this is a bit personal, but I think you should know. Rachel has been suspended from her job. I was surprised. Because of the divorce? Angela went quiet for a moment, then spoke softly. No. Because of that man. The vice principal. The school found out the 2 of them had used district funds for a fake conference. An anonymous complaint was sent straight to the Board of Education. I knew it was the private investigator I had hired. He had told me not to worry about the professional ethics part. He had solid evidence. I hadn't asked him to file the complaint, but he said, with someone like her, doing nothing would be irresponsible. The story spread quickly. Rachel didn't just lose her job, she lost her reputation. Parents began whispering. She teaches ethics to our kids, but had an affair with her boss and scammed school funds. The school board called an emergency meeting. Her lover, the vice principal, was forced to resign just 2 days later. Rachel called me. I saw her name on the screen, but felt nothing. I didn't pick up. A message followed. Ethan, please. I have nothing left. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Not out of hatred, but because I knew any words now would be meaningless. She once had everything: a loving husband, a stable job, a decent life. She threw it all away chasing illusions of power and easy money. Cal came by my house that evening. I heard about the thing at her school. Well, looks like there's no one left to cover for Rachel now. I nodded, said nothing. Cal poured me a bourbon and sat down beside me. You know Ethan? I didn't think you had it in you. You've always been too kind, too soft-hearted. But this time, you were right, and you handled it the right way. I looked at the glass. The golden light reflecting off it felt like the last ray of a long, exhausting day. I'm not proud, Cal. I'm just tired. You don't need to be proud. But you need to start over. Not for her. For yourself. A week later, I received a letter, not a text, not an email, but a handwritten letter. I recognized the handwriting. Rachel. Ethan. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I made the wrong choices, over and over again. My greed, my pride, and my foolishness destroyed everything. I lost my job, my friends, all the trust people had in me. And most importantly, I lost you. If I could go back in time, I wish I had listened to you, instead of disregarding everything you did for me. I'm not writing this to ask you to come back. I just want to say I'm sorry. Truly. Even if it's too late. I read it to the end, then folded it up. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt at peace. Rachel later moved out of Charlotte. I heard she was living off temporary support from a cousin, trying to get her teaching license reinstated. But now her record had an ethics violation, something hard to erase. Her former lover, the vice principal, completely vanished from the area. Rumor had it he left the state. I went back to work. Cal and I focused on growing our new branch in Tennessee. I spent more time on myself, learning photography, going hiking on weekends, and finally living, instead of just surviving beside someone fake. Eventually, I realized something. Some people don't leave because they've changed, they leave because they were never truly there. I tried applying for jobs elsewhere, but no school would take me because of my ethics record. I stayed in a small apartment I rented from an old acquaintance. Worked night shifts at a diner just to survive. I used to blame you. But over time, I realized, it wasn't that you changed, it was that you finally saw the truth I had tried so hard to hide. If I could go back, I wish I had made a different choice the day I saw that man's name pop up in my inbox. I wish I'd been clear-headed enough to delete it, and run back to hold you tight. I paused. Set the letter down. Not out of anger, but because of the sudden lump in my throat. That afternoon, Nora came by the garage. She looked at me, noticing something different in my eyes. Something wrong? I quietly handed her the letter. She read it slowly, then placed a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I nodded but said nothing. Ethan, if you need some space, I can leave. No, stay. You don't know what you're doing right now. But having you here helps me feel like I don't have to go back to where I was. That night, I drove alone out to the edge of town. I wasn't sure why, but I felt the need to say one last goodbye. I stopped by the temporary resting place, where Rachel had been taken, awaiting cremation. No one else was there. No friends, no family. No flowers. Just an empty room, a soft yellow light, and a closed casket. I stood there for a few minutes, then said softly, I once thought I'd hate you for the rest of my life. But now, I don't feel angry anymore. I feel sorry. Because you lost your chance. Not just with me, but with your own life. If only you'd realized it sooner, maybe things could have turned out differently. I placed a small badge on top of the casket, the Revive Garage logo. You can't come back anymore. But I'll keep moving forward, because I'm still alive. And I know I deserve peace. On the way back, I stopped at a hilltop overlooking the whole town. Streetlights sparkled. The night breeze was cool. I turned on the radio. A country song came on, slow, nostalgic, but warm. I thought about the early days, when it was just me and my old truck, when I believed I couldn't get back up after everything. But I did. Not because of anyone else, but because I refused to give up on myself. That night, when I got home, I found Nora asleep on the couch, book still open. I sat down beside her, gently shielding her eyes from the light. She stirred slightly and opened her eyes. You're back? I nodded. Yeah. It's all closed now. She didn't ask anything more. Just nodded, then leaned her head on my shoulder. We sat like that for a long time, in silence, but it was the most peaceful moment I'd had in years. A year after Rachel passed, the small town I lived in had changed. Revived Garage now had 5 full-time mechanics, 2 interns, a waiting lounge with free coffee, and even a little display corner with before and after photos of restored vehicles. Under each picture, I left a small note. Anything can be fixed, if you don't give up. I no longer counted the days trying to forget the past. Because now, the past no longer had a grip on me. It was just a part of my life story, an old chapter, already turned. Nora still came by every Saturday afternoon. Sometimes just to help me wipe down the counter, sometimes bringing sketches from her kids' art class. The kids called me Uncle Ethan with the big beard, and I called them the Bolt Captains, because they loved playing with the spare bolts I left lying around. One evening, after locking up the garage, Nora and I walked out to the lake near town. It was our usual spot whenever we had something on our minds. I turned to her and asked, "Do you think you're truly happy?" Nora looked at me, not answering right away. She scooped some water with her hand, letting the sparkling drops run down her wrist, then said, "I think happiness is when you no longer want to change the past. I don't need to fix anything. I just want to live each day fully, with someone I trust." I smiled. Nothing more was needed. That answer was enough. Some time later, I was invited to speak at a local technical college seminar, the same school where I had once hosted a group of interns. The topic was the rebirth of a mechanic. At first, I hesitated. But then I thought maybe my story, told at the right moment, could help someone stuck in pain without knowing the way out. I stepped onto the small wooden stage, held the microphone, and looked down at dozens of young faces. I spoke slowly. I once lost everything: trust, marriage, self-respect, and even myself. But then I realized there were 2 things I never lost: my hands and my heart. If you can still work, and still believe you deserve a good life, then you still have a chance. I don't need anyone to pay the price for me. Life has its own way of balancing things. But I believe this: what we choose, in the end, chooses us. If you choose to deceive, you'll end up alone. If you choose honesty, you'll find peace. The room was silent. Then came waves of applause, not because I was great, but because I was real. A month later, Nora and I held a small celebration, not a traditional wedding, just a backyard gathering with string lights, a few close friends, homemade cake, and a radio playing "Take Me Home, Country Roads." No fancy outfits. Just me, once betrayed by a wife, and her, once limping through life, now holding hands on a quiet afternoon. When we cut the cake, I looked around. There was no sense of anything missing. Everyone I needed was right there. I whispered to Nora, "You know, turns out, the most precious thing isn't what we keep, it's what we no longer need to hold on to." A week later, I received a letter from Michael Gillis's law office. This time, it wasn't a will or divorce paper. It was the completed deed transfer for the old house in Charlotte. Rachel had left it to me, with a short note. "I want you to have full say. Consider it my final act of atonement." I didn't keep it. I sold it, and donated all the money to a technical scholarship fund for underprivileged students, under the name the Second Chance Grant. I didn't need more property. I just wanted to leave behind something kinder than bitterness. By the end of that fall, I sat alone in front of the garage, coffee in hand, watching the leaves fall. The sky was clear, not a single cloud. I thought about the road I'd traveled, from a man betrayed, empty-handed, wandering a strange town, to a respected shop owner, a man strong enough to forgive, and wise enough to choose peace. No one can return the years I lost. But I can decide whether the years ahead will be full, or empty. From Ethan's story, we see that sometimes, loss and betrayal are the very things that lead to rebirth. When everything seemed to fall apart, he didn't choose resentment. He chose to rise, rebuild, and live better. Ethan didn't take revenge with bitterness, but with true success and peace. Life isn't measured by what we lose, but by how we face the pain. Forgiveness, letting go, and believing in our own worth, that's the greatest victory. What do you think about Ethan's choice? Is forgiving and living well the strongest response to betrayal? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt family stories.